The first real glimpse I had of just how outrageous my neighborhood HOA could be came one morning when I walked outside and noticed a handwritten sign nailed to the post of my dock. In sloppy pink marker, it screamed in all caps, "Reserved for HOA use only." The ink had already smudged from the morning dew, and someone had doodled a crooked crown beneath it, like they were making some royal proclamation. The problem? That dock sits squarely on my own deeded property. No shared rights, no community easement, just me, the water, and the modest wooden dock I had rebuilt myself after the last hurricane wrecked it. But apparently, overnight, the HOA had decided it belonged to them. I couldn't help but laugh literally out loud at how ridiculous it was. Someone, a full-grown adult, had trespassed across my yard just to tack up a middle school-style reserved sign as if we were squabbling over cafeteria seating. The jagged, overconfident handwriting gave away the culprit immediately. Marlene Henderson, the self-proclaimed queen of the waterfront and reigning HOA president. Marlene was the type who introduced herself with her title, not just her name, as though she held an actual government position. She drove around in a spotless white Lexus, wore oversized sun visors like they were a crown, and spoke as if every conversation needed to be written into official minutes. Lately, she'd developed a fixation on yachts. For weeks she'd been bragging about a very important guest who would be arriving with a 50-foot yacht. She mentioned it at the pool, by the trash bins, even in the grocery store, spinning it like a foreign dignitary was on the way. Naturally, she wanted this yacht to dock somewhere worthy, but here's the catch: the HOA doesn't own a single inch of waterfront. They manage hedges, paint colors, and mailbox styles, but docks, those are private property. Which made it all the more absurd when I found her gaudy pink decree nailed to mine. I tore it down, crumpled it, and went about my day, assuming she'd realize she'd crossed a line. I was wrong. That afternoon, while I was out pulling weeds, Marlene herself appeared, visor pulled low, clipboard under her arm like she was preparing for an inspection. Without so much as a hello, she marched to the shoreline, planted her hands on her hips, and announced, "You'll need to clear your dock this weekend. We're expecting traffic." "Traffic?" I asked, blinking at her. "This isn't I-95, Marlene, it's my dock." Her lips pinched thin. "This community has been selected to host the Spirit of Freedom," she declared with all the weight of a royal announcement. I stared back blankly. With a dramatic sigh, she explained, "A 50-foot yacht, bringing very distinguished guests to a charity gala." She had, apparently, promised them docking space. I repeated her words back slowly. "You assured them a broken bar on my dock?" She stood taller. "It's in the best interest of the neighborhood to present ourselves properly." "Naturally, you'll comply. I've already made the reservation." That was the moment I realized she wasn't joking. In her mind, being HOA president meant she had the power to commandeer my property like some medieval baroness. I kept my tone light. "People like Marlene thrive on outrage." "Fascinating," I said. "Funny, my deed doesn't say anything about offering my dock up for reservations." "Maybe check yours again." Her eyes narrowed. "Do you want to be the neighbor who embarrasses us in front of important visitors?" I shrugged. "If it's a choice between embarrassment and trespassing, I'll take embarrassment." She scribbled furiously on her clipboard and stormed off. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 mornings later, hammering woke me up. When I looked outside, coffee in hand, I nearly spit it everywhere. There was Marlenia with 2 HOA board members and TOA installing an actual metal reserved docking sign at the top of my walkway. They'd hauled in tools, cement, and were bolting it into place as if my property had magically changed hands. I stormed out in my pajama shorts, demanding they stop. One board member mumbled about community rights, while Marlene talked over him, throwing around phrases like temporary requisition and public good. I told them point blank that if they didn't leave immediately, I'd be calling the sheriff. They tightened the last bolt anyway, then strutted off smugly, as though their sign had rewritten the property lines. That night, I yanked the sign out of the ground, tossed it in my truck, and hauled it to the county dump. Problem solvida, or so I thought. But Marlene wasn't done. To her, no wasn't an answer, it was just an invitation to escalate. By the next day, she was canvassing the neighborhood, painting me as the villain. Neighbors started asking why I was blocking charity or if I hated important guests. Somehow, she'd spun the whole ordeal into a story where I was the petty troublemaker standing in the way of community progress. And unfortunately, some of them actually believed her. Marlene had this uncanny talent for disguising her entitlement as community spirit. And honestly, people wanted to believe her. But here's the thing. When you're playing chess against someone who doesn't realize they're playing checkers, there's no reason to get angry, you just wait for them to make the wrong move. I knew sooner or later she'd push too far, and when that happened, I'd be ready. Sure enough, a few days later, every single mailbox in the neighborhood held a glossy flyer. Across the top, in bold letters, it read, "Welcome the spirit of freedom." Beneath it was a photo of a gleaming white yacht, champagne glasses lined on the deck like something out of a magazine ad. At the bottom, in smaller type, it promised, "Community docking space courtesy of the HOA." Marlene had even scheduled a full-on welcoming ceremony complete with ribbon cutting and champagne right there at my dock. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flyer in disbelief. The audacity of it all was so outrageous I almost admired it. This wasn't some harmless overreach anymore. She hadn't just reserved my dock. She had announced to the entire neighborhood that it was the stage for her event. This wasn't confusion. This was occupation. And that's when an idea struck me, not out of spite, but out of sheer strategy. If Marlene wanted to play queen of the waterfront, maybe it was time to give her a dose of reality she hadn't considered. While she was busy fantasizing about yachts and champagne, I had something bigger, heavier, and infinitely less glamorous in mind. Something that would instantly flip the script the moment it drifted into the bay. I folded the flyer, smiled to myself, and decided, if Marlene wanted a spectacle, she'd get one. A massive one. By Saturday morning, my yard looked less like my own property and more like an event space she'd rented without asking. Folding chairs lined my lawn, caterers were unloading wide tablecloths and buckets of champagne, and someone had strung a banner between two oak trees that read, "Welcome, Spirit of Freedom." It felt surreal, like I'd woken up to find my quiet home rezoned as a country club. Neighbors trickled in, some too embarrassed to meet my eyes, others offering sheepish waves that seemed to say, "Sorry, you know how she is." I didn't hold it against them. Most were just swept up in Marlene's current, too nervous to push back. What I couldn't stomach was the sight of Marlene herself, visor gleaming like a helmet, clipboard in hand, strutting up and down my dock as if she were the general of a parade. She barked at the caterers for using paper napkins instead of cloth, fussed over chair placement so her distinguished guests would have the perfect waterfront view, and generally acted like the dock was her personal ballroom. Meanwhile, I was already 4 moves ahead. 4 days, I'd been on the phone with my buddy Eddie, a construction foreman who happened to owe me a favor. Eddie had access to something most homeowners never think about: barges. The big, ugly, industrial kind used to haul bulk material across the bay. When I explained the situation, Eddie just about fell out of his chair laughing. "So she's trying to hijack your dock for some yacht party? And you want me to park a barge there instead?" "Exactly," I told him. Eddie whistled. "That's evil." "I love it." When, Saturday morning, don't be late. So while Marlene micromanaged hors d'oeuvres, I was standing on the deck of a rust-streaked, 30-ton barge as it lumbered toward my property like a floating middle finger. Eddie piloted with a grin so wide it looked like he'd been waiting his entire life for this moment. As the hulking vessel came into view, conversations on shore started to die down. Neighbors shaded their eyes against the sun, whispering. By the time the barge fully appeared, the air was thick with nervous silence. Marlene finally spotted it, and her reaction was priceless. Her visor nearly flew off as she bolted to the dock, flailing her arms like an air traffic controller and screeching, "No, no, no, this is for private use. This is a community event." I cupped my hands and shouted back, "Funny you say that, Marlene, because you told everyone this dock belongs to the community. So here's my contribution, 1 barge. Hope your yacht enjoys the company." With a groaning creak, the barge nudged into place, dwarfing my dock with its sheer bulk. Chains clattered, seagulls wheeled overhead, and Eddie killed the engine before dropping anchor with a satisfied grin. The massive beast of a boat sat there, immovable and ugly, hogging every inch of space where her prized yacht was supposed to dock. The silence that followed was glorious. A few neighbors covered their mouths, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. One kid whispered, "That's awesome," before his mother shushed him. Marlene, though, looked like she'd just swallowed a lemon whole. Her face went crimson as she pointed at me, shrieking, "You will move this immediately. This is obstruction. This is vandalism." I called back, "Vandalism? It's a boat, Marlene, at my dock. Doing exactly what docks are for. But if we're going to talk vandalism, maybe we should revisit that illegal sign you cemented into my lawn last week." She sputtered, shaking with rage, her clipboard trembling in her hands. You can't just this is sabotage." "One word for it," I said, leaning against the barge railing like I was on a pleasure cruise. "Property rights." "But hey, tomato, tomato," the crowd murmured. Some looked nervous, no doubt imagining lawsuits on the horizon. Others were openly entertained after weeks of Marlene's nonsense. Seeing her unravel was better than cable. Then came the twist I hadn't fully considered. Out on the horizon, slicing through the waves, was the spirit of freedom itself. A massive gleaming yacht, chrome flashing in the sun, moving steadily toward our modest little bay. It dwarfed everything of the houses, the shoreline, every dock it passed. People gasped. Marlene, suddenly electrified, snapped back into command mode. "Champagne now." She barked at the caterers. Chairs adjusted, napkins fixed. Then she turned on me again, voice cracking, "Move that trust bucket immediately." But the barge sat there, unbothered. Eddie just crossed his arms and smirked. The yacht slowed as it approached, its crew visibly puzzled at the sight of our humble dock blocked by what looked like a floating scrapyard. The captain raised a hand, clearly confused. Marlene sprinted down my dock as far as she could go, visor bobbing, arms waving like a frantic air traffic controller. "Over here, welcome, we have it reserved." She kept shouting reserved like it was some magic word that would make 30 tons of steel vanish. I couldn't resist. I cupped my hands and yelled across the water, "Sorry, folks, dock's occupied. You'll need to find another spot." The yacht's crew looked at me, then at her, then at the hulking barge. After a moment's hesitation, the captain shrugged, turned the wheel, and guided the vessel back toward open water. Watching that glittering monstrosity retreat was like witnessing Marlene's entire fantasy collapse in real time. She screamed. Not just yelled, screamed. Her hands shook, her voice broke into new curse combinations I'm fairly certain she invented on the spot. Then she spun on me, shrill enough to set neighborhood dogs barking. "You've humiliated us. You've ruined everything. Do you have any idea who was on that yacht? Do you know what connections you've just cost this community?" "Connections?" I said flatly. "Marlene, this isn't Davos. It's a cul-de-sac in Florida." That cracked a few neighbors. Someone snorted. Another coughed into their hand to hide a laugh. Eddie let out a booming laugh from the barge. But Marlene wasn't finished. She shoved her clipboard at a board member and hissed, "This is war. I'll have you fined, sanctioned, evicted if I have to. Think you are clever? We'll see how clever you are when the legal notices arrive." I leaned casually against the railing and called after her, "Better make sure they spell my name right. I'd hate for the paperwork to get lost." The crowd slowly broke apart, some shaking their heads, others whispering, a few patting me on the shoulder as they passed. Eddie promised to leave the barge tied up for a week, which suited me just fine. The hulking beast sat in the bay like an iron guardian of my dock. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the sunset behind the barge's silhouette. Petty? Sure. Over the top? Definitely. But perfect? Marlene had wanted a coronation. She wound up with a scrapyard centerpiece. By Monday, the barge was practically a tourist attraction. Kids rode their bikes down to gawk, joggers slowed to snap photos, even an old fisherman parked his truck one evening, grinned at the sight, and muttered, "Well, that's one way to tell the hoe to shove it." But Marlene wasn't smiling. Every time her white Lexus rolled past, I could practically hear her grinding her teeth. Visor pulled so low it nearly covered her face. She stopped talking to me directly. Instead, she unleashed her favorite weapon, official whole letters. The first arrived Tuesday. I neatly folded on whole letterhead, stamped urgent. Inside, a 3-page manifesto accused me of jeopardizing community safety, violating aesthetic standards, and blocking maritime access. She gave me 72 hours to remove the unsightly industrial obstruction from community space or face daily fines of $500. I nearly spit out my coffee. Community space. My dock was deeded private property. I pulled out my paperwork, reread the lines just to be sure, then laughed so hard my dog tilted his head at me like I'd lost my mind. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I made copies of her letter and taped them to the community mailbox with a handwritten note. Fun fact, this dock belongs to me, not the HOA. Guess someone skipped reading comprehension. I signed it with a smiley face. The next day brought letter number 2 shorter, nastier. She accused me of defaming HOA leadership and fostering hostility among neighbors, then demanded I remove my postings immediately and schedule a compliance hearing. I ignored that one too, because while Marlene was busy hammering away at her keyboard, drafting threats, I was digging into something far more useful, research. I already knew in my gut the HOA had zero authority over my dock, but I didn't just want a gut feeling. I wanted proof, ironclad and undeniable. I wanted proof. So I spent an afternoon at the county recorder's office digging through property records. Sure enough, every single waterfront deed in our subdivision spelled it out clearly. The docks belonged to the homeowners. No shared rights, no HOA oversight, pure, private ownership. I made copies, highlighted the key sections, and slid them into a neat folder. With that in hand, I could have marched straight to Marlene and ended the whole charade. But I knew her typey people like Marlene don't retreat when they're wrong. They double down, and I wanted her to. The further she pushed, the harder the crash would be when reality hit. And push she did. That Friday, while the barge floated peacefully by my dock like an unbothered guard dog, Marlene called an emergency HOA meeting. Flyers went into every mailbox. Out of pure curiosity and a healthy dose of amusement I decided to attend. The clubhouse was packed. Every folding chair was taken. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls. At the front, Marlene stood like a field general, visor gleaming under the fluorescent lights, clipboard clutched tight. Behind her hung 2 blown-up posters, one of the Spirit of Freedom yacht, pristine and shining, the other of the barge, captured from the ugliest angle possible. She launched into her speech without even pretending at pleasantries. Our community faces a crisis, she declared, voice ringing with righteous fury. One homeowner has chosen selfishness over unity, humiliating us before distinguished guests and tarnishing our reputation as an elite waterfront neighborhood. I leaned back in my chair, smirking. Elite? Half the houses still had missing hurricane shutters from last season. She wasn't done. Her words rose like a sermon. This obstruction at this eyesore isn't just offensive to our values, it's dangerous. It blocks emergency access, it drags down property values, and it sends a message to the outside world that we are hostile, disorganized, and unwelcoming. She thrust a finger toward the poster of the barge. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whether genuine or theatrical, it was hard to say. Then she dropped her bombshell. The board has voted to impose daily fines of $500 until the obstruction is removed, and we are already pursuing legal counsel to secure immediate injunctive relief. The room erupted in murmurs. Some nodded grimly, others looked uneasy, a few glanced at me, waiting to see if I'd fold. I stood, folder in hand. May I asked. Marlene's eyes narrowed, but she gave a stiff nod. Briefly, I walked to the front, opened my folder, and held up the documents. This is the county record of my property deed. It says, in plain black and white, that this dock is private property, not whole land, not shared community space. Mine. I handed copies down the rows. Neighbors leaned together, reading. Eyebrows shot up, murmurs turned skeptical. So when Marlene tells you my barge is blocking a community space, I continued, she's either misinformed or deliberately misleading you. Either way, the HOA has zero authority here. Zero. And if they try to fine me, I'll be more than happy to meet them in court. Spoiler, the county records will win. I snapped the folder shut. If the real problem is that Marlene's yacht party fell apart, that's not a community issue. That's her personal disappointment. A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Marlene's face flushed crimson. She slammed her clipboard onto the podium and shrieked, "This man is undermining our unity. He is a cancer to this neighborhood. But the damage was done. The paperwork spoke louder than her theatrics. Even neighbors who feared her had seen the truth, and the invincibility of her authority had cracked. The meeting unraveled into chaos. Some stormed out, others whispered in tight clusters. Marlene stood at the front, seething, veins throbbing at her temples. I walked out calmly, folder under my arm like a prize. I figured that might cool her off, but I underestimated her appetite for escalation. 2 days later, I was jolted awake by the sound of heavy machinery, coffee in hand. I stepped outside and nearly dropped the mug. Parked at the entrance to my dock was a crane truck. Workers in neon vests were unloading equipment, overseen by none other than Marlene herself. Clipboard in hand, she was pointing and barking orders at the barge. I stormed down toward the waterline. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She turned, smug as ever, removing a hazard. "You refuse to comply, so the board authorized emergency action." The workers exchanged uneasy looks. One muttered, "Ma'am, we'll need legal paperwork for this." "Do it," she snapped. I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff. By the time deputies arrived, the crew had barely managed to hook a single chain to the barge. The deputies barely let the workers secure a single chain before stepping in. They heard both sides, then asked to review the property documents. I handed over my folder. After a quick scan, they nodded and turned to Marlene. "Ma'am, this dock is private property. You have no authority here. If you don't move this equipment immediately, you'll be trespassing." Her face twisted with fury. "This is outrageous. This is corruption." The deputies didn't even flinch. "Pack it up." So, by the time she officially filed a lawsuit, I wasn't shocked. I'd been waiting for it like a storm you can feel building in the air. The barge remained anchored, stubborn as ever, while Marlene spiraled further out of control. Gone were the clipped whole letters and judgmental glare as now she was chasing neighbors on their morning walks, ranting about how my eyesore was tanking everyone's property values and making our neighborhood the butt of local gossip. The court papers arrived on a Wednesday, hand-delivered by a wary process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Good luck, buddy," he muttered as he handed me the envelope. Inside was a mountain of legal jargon thick enough to choke a horse. Marlene, acting under the HOA's banner, was suing me for breaking community rules, obstructing maritime access, creating a nuisance, and my personal favorite, damaging the neighborhood's reputation. Reputational harm. I had to read that line twice before laughing so hard I almost spilled coffee over the stack. Who exactly was harmed? Marlene's imaginary yacht guests. The caterer left with untouched champagne. Still, a lawsuit is no joke. I called Eddie, the guy who delivered the barge and become my biggest cheerleader in this saga, and gave him the news. "She's really going all in, huh?" He chuckled. "You gonna fight it?" "Of course," I told him, "but I'll need a lawyer who actually enjoys tearing into HOA boards." Enter Danielle Pierce, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in property disputes. I told her the whole saga: dock, barge, yacht queen, and she leaned back in her chair with a grin. "This might be the dumbest case I've ever heard, a broken bar, or the most fun one I'll get all year. Maybe both. I'll take it." She flipped through the complaint, shaking her head. "Half of this is nonsense. The rest is unenforceable. They're counting on you folding under legal pressure. But you've got the deed, the county records, the sheriff's backing, and, well, a broken bar and actual barge sitting there as proof. This case is a bonfire, and they're the ones holding the match." The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Marlene turned the neighborhood into a war zone. She passed out flyers claiming I was destroying property values, hosted emergency meetings where she ranted about outsiders mocking us, and even started an email chain accusing me of inviting industrial pollution into our bay. But cracks began to show. After the crane incident, people had started to doubt her judgment. When the lawsuit hit, the whispers grew louder. Wasn't this overkill? Could HOA dues even cover the legal fees? Was it worth dragging everyone into court over one guy's dock? By week 2, quiet support began to surface. A retired Navy vet named Tom knocked on my door one evening, grinning. "Son, I don't care much for barges if they're ugly, but I hate power-hungry busybodies even more. You hold your ground. If you need me to testify, I'm in." Even better, Danielle uncovered something juicy. The HOA board hadn't even properly voted to authorize the lawsuit. Marlene had pushed it through with only 2 other members, neither of whom bothered to read the filings. That meant the whole case was shaky before it even reached the courtroom. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse lobby felt like a neighborhood reunion. Half the subdivision had shown up, some curious, others giddy. Marlene strutted in wearing a tailored blazer, visor finally gone, clutching her clipboard like it was armor. She carried herself as if she were about to argue before the Supreme Court. I followed behind Danielle, calm as ever, while she carried my deed folder like a loaded weapon. When the case was called, Marlene delivered her performance. She painted me as some reckless saboteur who had defiled the community's aesthetic harmony, scared away important guests, and single-handedly tanked property values. She even paraded blown-up photos of the barge, brandishing them like evidence at a murder trial. Her voice quavered with outrage, nearly cracking into tears. The judge, an older man with glasses sliding down his nose, listened patiently. Then he turned to Danielle. She stood, poised and deliberate, and handed him the county records. "Your Honor, the deed is clear. The dock belongs solely to my client. The HOA has no jurisdiction here. Their bylaws do not extend to privately deeded waterfront structures, and this has been confirmed by county records as well as the sheriff's office. The HOA's claim is baseless." She flipped through the complaint, her tone sharpening. "As for reputational harm, there is no legal standing. Courts don't exist to rule on hurt feelings from failed yacht parties." The crowd rippled with laughter. Marlene stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin line. Danielle continued, unwavering. Danielle's voice sharpened as she delivered the final blow. "Your Honor, this lawsuit was filed without proper board approval. Ms. Henderson acted alone, putting her HOA at risk for misuse of funds and frivolous litigation." The room went dead silent. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide. A few HOA board members, sitting stiffly in the back, looked like they wanted to melt into the benches. The judge adjusted his glasses, tapped his pen against the desk, and exhaled heavily. "I've reviewed the evidence," he said. "The dock is unquestionably private property. The HOA has no jurisdiction here. The fines are invalid, the claims of obstruction irrelevant. This case is dismissed effective immediately. Furthermore, I suggest the HOA revisit its leadership practices to prevent this sort of waste in the future." With a crack of the gavel, it was over. The room split in half, some stifling laughter, others grumbling under their breath. Marlene froze, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline, her hands trembling as though someone had just pulled the ground out from under her. She scanned the crowd, desperate for backup, but even her board members refused to meet her gaze. Danielle leaned toward me with a smirk. "That was easier than I expected." Outside, the neighborhood swarmed. Some clapped me on the back, congratulating me. Others whispered about wasted dues and poor leadership. One muttered, "Board votes happening tonight." Marlene stormed past, muttering about appeals and corruption, but her power was gone. She had overplayed her hand, and everyone had watched her fall. Still, I wasn't foolish enough to think she'd just fade quietly into the background. People like Marlene never surrender, they just find new battlegrounds. I figured she'd retreat, spread rumors, maybe stir up another campaign. But I didn't expect her next move. That night, while I was sitting on my porch with a cold beer, the barge casting its hulking shadow across the bay, I spotted movement along the shoreline. Flashlights, figures shifting in the dark. I set my drink down, stood, and squinted. Then I saw her, Marlenia, with bolt cutters in hand. By the time the deputies arrived, she and 2 of her cronies were crouched at the water's edge, sweating and fumbling like clumsy burglars. From my upstairs window, I had a perfect view. 3 HOA board members in khakis and boat shoes straining against a hurricane-proof chain, their flashlights bouncing across the barge's steel hull. It would have been comical if it hadn't been so dangerous. If they'd actually broken the chain, the barge could have drifted, smashing docks or even slamming into the marina down the bay. I kept the house dark as the deputy's cruiser pulled up, headlights sweeping across my yard. The beam caught Marlene mid-swing. She froze like a deer in the glare. "Hands where we can see them." One deputy barked. Panic rippled through the group. One man dropped his flashlight immediately. Another tried to run but tripped over a coil of rope and hit the ground hard. Marlene, true to form, refused to quit. She straightened with the cutters still in hand and shrieked, "This is community business. I'm restoring order." He sabotaged us all. The deputy walked toward her calmly, hand hovering over his holster. "Ma'am, put the cutters down." Her voice cracked into hysteria. "You don't understand. He humiliated us, ruined our reputation. That monstrosity is a blight and I'm fixing it. I am president of this association." "Ma'am," the deputy said flatly, "the only thing you're fixing right now is a criminal mischief charge. Put them down." For a second, I thought she might go at the chain again. But one of her companions tugged her sleeve frantically. With a dramatic groan, she finally tossed the bolt cutters into the grass. The deputies corralled the three of them away from the dock. I stepped outside, hands casually in my pockets. "You the property owner?" one deputy asked. "Yep," I said. "And the one who called this in?" "They've been trying to sabotage my barge all night," Marlene erupted, jabbing a finger at me. "He's lying. He's lied from the start. That dock belongs to the community." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "We've already confirmed ownership with the county." "Ma'am, you don't have any jurisdiction here." Her face twisted, and for a moment I thought she'd collapse right there. Instead, she hissed, "Then I'll take this to the state, to the governor, if I have to." The deputies exchanged a wary glance. They took statements, bagged the cutters as evidence, and informed Marlene and her cronies they'd be facing trespassing and attempted vandalism charges. No handcuffs this time, no perp walk, just paperwork and a long, humiliating ride home. The humiliation was absolute. By the next morning, the whole neighborhood knew. Photos were everywhere, circulating group texts, popping up online. One showed the deputies' cruisers parked at the cul-de-sac, their lights glowing red and blue across the water. Another caught Marlene mid-scream, her face twisted with rage, the barge looming behind her like a steel monument to her downfall. By sunrise, the HOA Facebook page had turned into a battlefield. A handful of loyalists defended her. She was only protecting the neighborhood, but far more criticized her reckless behavior. The turning point came when Tom, our retired Navy neighbor, posted a calm but devastating account of the entire saga. He spelled it out clearly. Marlene had abused her position, wasted community funds on a pointless lawsuit, and endangered lives by trying to tamper with a vessel in the dark. He ended with a line that stuck: "If this is the leadership we choose, then we deserve the embarrassment. Otherwise, it's time to vote for change." That sealed it. At the next board meeting, the clubhouse was overflowing. People who hadn't attended in years showed up, arms crossed, faces grim. Marlene tried to pound the gavel into order, but the crowd shouted over her. One after another, homeowners stood up and demanded her resignation. They listed the wasted dues, the failed lawsuit, the trespassing charges. Even her few remaining supporters sat silent. Finally, someone made a motion, a vote of no confidence. Hands went up across the room, row by row, until the result was undeniable. Marlene was finished. She left without a word. No visor, no clipboard, no speech. Just a woman clutching her papers like a shield, eyes down, walking out into the night stripped of her throne. The new board wasted no time. They threw out every fine I'd ever been slapped with, issued a public apology to the community, and a best of all lowered dues slightly after canceling the legal fees Marlene had secretly approved. The sense of relief was instant. Smiles returned. Neighbors hosted barbecues again. For the first time in months, it felt like a neighborhood instead of a war zone. As for the barge, Eddie returned with his tugboat and hauled it away once the point had been made. My dock was quiet again, almost too quiet without that massive steel beast sitting guard. But its legend stuck around. To this day, neighbors laugh about the barge incident at block parties. Kids sketch lopsided barges and chalk on the sidewalks. One evening, Tom raised his beer to me and said, "That barge did more for this neighborhood than any HOA president ever has. It brought us together, just not the way Marlene wanted." I laughed, clinked my bottle against his, and said, "Guess you could say it docked us together." But honestly, my satisfaction wasn't from the barge, or even from winning in court. It came from seeing Marlene's power unravel. For years, she'd ruled with intimidation of fines, letters, threats. She thrived on fear, but the moment someone stood their ground, All of it collapsed. She wasn't a queen. She wasn't even a strategist. She was just another neighbor with too much time, too much ego, and a clipboard she mistook for a crown. The last time I saw her, months later, she was walking her dog by the bay. No visor, no clipboard, just Marlenia, smaller, quieter, and ignored. A relic of a reign no one wanted back. As for me, I still sit on my dock some evenings, beer in hand, watching the sunset paint the water. Sometimes I think about that absurd flyer she printed, the one promising champagne and a ribbon cutting for a yacht that never appeared. And I smile because while Marlene dreamed of bringing prestige to the neighborhood with pageantry, I ended up doing it with a rusty 30-ton barge. And yacht stories be told, I wouldn't change a thing.